Tomorrow, Canada's bail system goes under the microscope. The federal justice minister is hosting his provincial counterparts in Ottawa to discuss how to beef it up. The provinces say the current system is creating too many repeat offenders. Kelvin Gertson is the Manitoba Justice Minister and Bronwyn Eyre is Saskatchewan's Justice Minister. Ministers, thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Minister Gertson, let's just start with you. What do you hope to get out of this meeting on bail reform?
Meaningful change. We've already had enough meetings. We had a meeting as Ministers of Justice last fall where every Attorney General and Minister of Justice in Canada agreed that there should be bail reform. And you know from covering federal politics, you don't get provinces agree on everything very often. And then the premiers came alongside. Municipalities across Canada said there needed to be bail reform. So the time for talk is over. We need actual proposals on how to change the criminal code.
So, Minister Eyre, how would tougher bail laws help things in Saskatchewan?
Well, I think to Minister Gertson's point, we have broad consensus increasingly, including in Saskatchewan, that bail reform is needed and that the bail system is, if not broken, in serious trouble. And if you look at the goals of the bail system, public confidence and maintaining it and maintaining public safety are the two overarching ones. And whether it's the premiers who are saying that the system needs change and reform, whether it's police chiefs, a third of Canadians now only has faith in the criminal justice system. I think we need to have a real look at the federal principle of restraint, which was codified in 2019 under Bill C-75, and which basically lays out explicitly that those in a bail situation, those facing whether remand or release, shall be released at the earliest opportunity with the fewest amount of conditions.
Right.
And that needs to change from Saskatchewan's perspective.
You know, Minister Gertson, we've heard this, and Alberta has gone as far as to call for the complete repeal of Bill C-75. But bail is a protected charter right, you know, and I know the move towards a reverse onus. How do you strike that balance of going towards a reverse onus without impinging on people's rights?
So, no question, bail is part of our constitutional framework, and courts have opined on it many different times. But there are reverse onus provisions already within the criminal code. So the Supreme Court has said that there are times when it makes sense, when there's a public safety concern, and when you're targeted. We're being very targeted. We're saying that repeat violent offenders should have a reverse onus. That encapsulates, you know, a few different things that both Manitoba and Saskatchewan are concerned about. But the principle of reverse onus is not new. It's not untested. But what is new is the level of violence that we're seeing in our provinces compared to what has been over the last decade. And it requires a response. We think this is a constitutional response, and we think it's the right thing to do to protect the public and stop letting people out who are causing more victims in society.
But Minister Eyre, what about the capacity challenges inside the correction system, right? You know, it's been 20 years as a local reporter in St. John's covering provincial court and provincial jails. Long delays, overcrowded, you know, overcapacity, correctional institutions. This is why we have the Jordan Principle right now, or the Jordan decision to get people speedy access to a trial. If you start tightening up bail conditions, don't you exacerbate some of those problems in terms of the clogging and the overcrowding?
Well, I think the point is you tighten up bail conditions where you are confronting repeat violent offenders and repeat violent offenders with firearms. And Manitoba and Saskatchewan have also called to include bear spray, knife use when it comes to assessing what is a violent offense, particularly repeat violent offense. So on the overcapacity issue, the capacity issue, that of course remains something that we all address as provinces, and certainly remains an issue, and there are legislated, codified provisions that address that, certainly partnerships that provinces undertake, the prosecutions face that. So all of those things, all of those parties within the administration of justice are addressing the capacity issue, but this is really about the repeat violent offending and the repeat violent offending with weapons. And as I say, the loosening of bail restrictions in 2019 with Bill C-75. That's a recent change, and that further codified that loosening of restrictions, which is really pushed the balance too far.
Right. So, but Minister Gertzen, some of those changes in 2019, I know you argue the balance was pushed too far, but proponents of those changes felt it was maybe too far the other way, right? That a lot of Indigenous prisoner population and marginalized and racialized communities were overrepresented in correctional institutes, and bail may have been part of that. So how do you balance those competing interests there?
And there are competing interests, and we believe that we need to ensure that, you know, we're dealing with the best we can with the issue of overrepresentation, but we also know that ultimately our job as Minister of Justice and Attorney General across Canada is to ensure public safety. And we now have real life experience with Bill 75. Before it was sort of theoretical. Now we've seen the implications in terms of what it's done in the courts, what it's done with law enforcement, and that pendulum is swung this way. And remember, we're not saying nobody can apply for bail.
Sure.
We're not saying you might not even get bail. Ultimately, that's a judge's decision. Absolutely. But a reverse onus says the individual who's a repeat offender has to demonstrate why it is that they won't be a risk to public safety.
Minister, we've seen these extreme cases of repeat offenders accused of serious and violent crimes. The police shooting in Ontario is an obvious example. But what's the data on this? Just like we talk about the increase in violent crime in Canada, which is backed up by statistics, but what percentage of that is driven by repeat offenders as opposed to new offenders, for example?
Well, I think that police chiefs, police services across the country have done pretty extensive canvassing of rise in social disorder, rise in violent crime. And we see, yes, there are the high-profile cases. And when you see some of the details of these high-profile cases and the number of times which in several notable cases, repeat violent offenders have been released and re-released and have gone on to offend. As some commentators have said, it would make bleeding hearts turn to stone, because some of these cases are very, very sobering. And so, again, it's not just we who are saying this and sounding the alarm. It's police chiefs, it's premiers, it's provinces where we are seeing an absolute increase in resources committed to community safety. Mm-hmm. And so we're seeing it on the ground, we're seeing it in the statistics, and police services are dealing with it.
I notice you both want to put bear spray into the mix here. That's I don't know if you call it a weapon, but it's an instrument used, notably I've seen in drug crime, for example. If people want to avoid the serious gun charges, they have bear spray as a defensive weapon. But I wonder, you're going to put this all on the table in the meeting with the Federal Justice Minister. Where do you leave this when you finish these conversations?
Well, and we put it on the table, you know, months ago, and so this isn't new. We're not coming to Ottawa and springing anything on anybody. And it's been discussed with deputy ministers for months. The issue of bear spray in Manitoba, and it's true in Saskatchewan, I mean, there's been a 4 times increase of bear spray used, you know, just randomly to spray people in Winnipeg. And there's not a lot of bears in Winnipeg. And so we have a real concern, real challenge with that, along with knives and other sorts of weapons. So nobody's surprised. We need the federal government, Mr. Lametti, to come tomorrow with concrete suggestions on the amending the criminal code. I've been to Ottawa before. I suspect you've been to Ottawa before. We're not here, you know, to partake in the nice scenery of Ottawa. We actually need real concrete suggestions that we can move forward with legislative changes through the federal government in the criminal code.
Minister, do you think you get that tomorrow? Or do you think this is a to-be-continued conversation once you leave?
Well, we hope not. And Justice Minister Lametti has said that he's open to listening to the provinces, hearing from us on this, and to providing, I think went the quote, potential additional resources or supports for provinces. What that means is, of course, the question, and I think to the point about the criminal code, that is within the federal government's sole ambit. There's only so much provinces can do. Directives around bail is one limited way one can address this. As we saw with BC, Saskatchewan is looking at something similar in terms of, you know, you must seek bail, you must seek remand if there's a risk to public safety, for example. But really, what we're looking for are the powers within Bill C-75, the criminal code, language around the principle of restraint, which, as I say, is codified now, and it's very clear. Earliest opportunity released with the fewest number of conditions. That, when we're talking about repeat violent offenders, if that becomes a quandary for judges to weigh, and it is a quandary for judges to weigh, we have an issue when it comes to repeat violent offenders being released again and again in this country.
Okay. Kelvin Gertzen, Bronwyn here, thank you so much for coming in. It was great to meet you.
Thank you so much.